Hey, Robert, thanks for coming on the show. So we'll jump right into it. This is the first episode of Serious Conversations. We're joined today by the wonderful Senior Master Sergeant Robert Rivers. And we'll start by jumping in with your intro, how long you've been in, what you've done, AFSC by trade, all that fun stuff that we always do. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All of the work stuff, right? Robert Rivers, this is where are we at now? We're rolling into 23. So what is this? Rolling into 16 years. So I'll hit 16 years in June. June it is. For Alpha Zero by trade, so health admin services. Done that. That's been my only AFSC in the Air Force. Got the opportunity to do a whole bunch of stuff. But officially, that's been the only AFSC that I've had in the Air Force. So, what else we talking about? Married, kid, got a dog. Up here at Hanscom right now. I feel like that's it. That should be good.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for meeting up on this evening. My morning time zones are a fun thing. So we're going to start with the warm up. So, first question, try to loosen up and get into this conversation. First question is, do
Okay.
you smile often?
Yeah. So, I think I think that's just one of the things. Yeah, everybody always says like you always seem like you're happy. Yeah,
Do
most
you
days.
think you deal with things more internally?
Um, I think it just comes from like appreciating where I am versus like kind of where I was. So I look at it as like I have a lot of things to be thankful for versus not. So
Yeah, life is too short. I definitely get that quite often. Being happy and upbeat, just experience throughout life have been. Life is too short, and not in the YOLO like be crazy and do dumb stuff type. Life is too short, but just appreciate the things that you were given and where we've ended up. So definitely, I sometimes wonder. It kind of gives off the feeling like I don't care and things like that. So I have heard that from time to time. Like, why does it always seem like you're happy? But it just hasn't been anything that's been so monumental where it would have to lock up and freeze my whole day, which that's been lucky so far. Um, Next question. What makes you proud?
you said proud,
Proud.
huh? I would say my kid. So um, as with everybody else, right? Like dealing with COVID was probably one of the, for her young life, that was her first real like test with resilience, and I think to see her now, to see her on the other side, and just who she is as a person, who she's developing into as a young lady, like she makes me proud.
That's awesome. Good stuff. So, one question for you to me.
So I'm always interested in two things. I always ask people two things, but I'll try to wrap the question into one, right? So your what are you reading right now, and what is your favorite act right now?
What am I reading and what is my favorite app? So right now, I'm rereading for another time one of my favorite books, Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. I try to put a lot of her stuff into practice. She has a lot of good quotable things in there. One of the things I always come back to, it's one of my favorite quotes from the book, is multiple realities exist simultaneously. And I think that's really good for perspective. So we were talking earlier about being happy and being proud, and I think a lot of those things come down to perspective. So, and that helps you, if you're getting the cliches and different, sayings and whatnot, like putting your self in other people's shoes and things like that. I think once you stop and reflect for a little bit, that really helps make better decisions instead of jumping into things. One of my favorite stories I love to tell stories, maybe more than I should, but I was bringing Ezekiel to school one day, and I rushed into the CDC, and there was somebody in this parking spot at the CDC, and they were over the line, and I was so frustrated. And I had this range of emotions, like this person's disrespectful, they don't care about me, they're rude, they're all these negative feelings. And then I go to take him in, drop him off. I'm still full of like all these negative thoughts, really no reason, but your mind just starts to go. And then I come back out after dropping him off, and sure enough, the car that was there before has now moved. I inadvertently, without really thinking about it, sidestepped to allow enough room for them. And now I am over the line. And so the next person that pulls in gets to have all those negative and terrible thoughts about me being inconsiderate and disrespectful and things like that. So it's one of my favorite examples of just perspective. Things can flip in an instant. So you might think you're really low or you're really high, but in an instant, I walked in, I came out, and then I completely was the other person in that situation. So next time, I come into the parking lot and see the person parked incorrectly. Maybe they were busy. Maybe, the kid has an accident. Maybe, there's a huge list of things to try to take into mind. And maybe really they are disrespectful and, terrible human. But more than likely, they got a better, more normal reason out of that. So perspective is super important. And I love when you see things like that out in the world, because I love to learn. And I say that, and I think a lot of people think I mean like a book. And I like to learn from books as well. But the situations where you see it out in life, I think I remember a lot more. Like I do quote books from time to time, but I remember the situations a lot more. And then the other one was my favorite app. Oh shoot, I don't know. I'd say like Sleeper for fantasy football, but that's a terrible example. Or Facebook is probably what I'm using most, which is also probably a terrible example. But um, I truly think there's a lot of good that comes from Facebook. I know there is a lot of negativity and things that come from that. But you and I both on the MSC page or 4AO page, I get something from that almost every day, if not every day. Different ways of doing things, asking questions, just seeing how people are doing. Even the Airman NCO page, I know I stay on there intentionally because I want to see the pulse and what's going on. And I get questioned a lot being on the O side. I'm not enlisted. Should I really be there? And should I be there because it's so negative? But my answer is always the same. I have to know what's going on, good, bad, or indifferent. So I don't think the solution is to ignorance is bliss, I guess. Like burying your head in the sand isn't the right solution. So knowing, and I think that goes back to not invalidating people's feelings. Like if they feel that way, yes, it's a little swayed, I think, because they feel like it's an anonymous platform sometimes with made up profiles and things like that. But they still were the human behind the keyboard that felt they needed to put their fingers through that motion to put that out into the internet. So um, so it's valid. It has to be a valid. You cannot like what they said. You can think that whatever you want to think, I guess, but it doesn't invalidate the feelings. The feelings are still there. So I spend probably too much time on Facebook, but I would like to believe it's helpful. I put out a lot of good information on the MSC page. And so I think those would be my two. So love Fierce Conversation. I think everyone should read it. And one of my two favorite things about the book, kind of backstepping, I guess, is one, she talks about stories, and then she talks about the aftermath. I feel like a lot of books that I've read in the leadership realm tell you how things should go, and it's kind of in theory because it's from the front part of a situation, but she does the front part and then she comes back and shows the aftermath months or years later on how the people got through the tough situation they were in. And then my second favorite part of that book is she talks about conversations, and conversations happen throughout your entire life, which I think is awesome, because sometimes we think of the leadership books only at work, but conversations happen between your spouse and your kids. And so if you can have better conversations, you're going to have a better overall life. So I love that it blends both of those, and I can take some of the principles and practices that she has to work, but then also try to use them at home because we're having conversations all the time. Another one of my favorite quotes, which kind of sounds crazy, but she says, we're having conversations all the time. Sometimes they involve other people. And so she's talking about that inner monologue where we're always saying, things to ourselves, positive things, hopefully. A lot of times I think we say a lot of negative things to ourselves. We can't do it. We should try something else. We should give up. And so that part, kind of drives the rest of the book and the rest of your life. If you are having good conversations with yourself, making sure you're building yourself up, you're going to be taking care of everyone else, which is way all over the place from your question.
No, so I think there's so much, because I've also read Crucial Conversations too, right? And there's so much stuff that comes from the book, and especially when we were rolling through that back at Edwards, to try to stimulate just interactions and people kind of getting into that space where you learn something new, right? So, and you highlight something that I've done lately, and inadvertently just talking through it with people, or like where you go back and you reread books and you pick up like, oh, there's some new things that when I read this before didn't necessarily kind of pinpoint or focus on this, and so that works. And then so I asked about apps because it's not always, you know what I mean, like in spaces and places where people are like, oh, well, I use this app that helps me track my sleep or meditation, or it's not always the things that you're looking at where they're productive. I think it just goes to like how you use it, right? And then so that's, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, right? It's good or bad depending on how you use it, what you use it for, what engagements, that kind of stuff goes through. And even the pages is the same thing. So I think it's like perspective is just a huge piece of that, of all of it, because you gain perspective both in life and from literature. So it was
And I found out I was old. So funny story, we had our exec comm guy, he comes over, helps the colonel with his stuff at the house and at work as well. And so we had his sipper go down in his office. So I called, he came over to help us. And earlier that morning, our command chief, Chief Woods, he's awesome. He had highlighted him earlier that morning. And so when he came in, I was like, cool, I saw you, or I think I made the comment like, you're famous or something kind of funny. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, you were on the page. And he's like, what page? I was like, oh, you were on Facebook. And he straight up, without skipping a beat, he said, oh, Facebook? I'm not on there. That's for old people. I was like, oh. And he said, yeah, I'm only 22. And then he walked away. I was like, what just happened? So in an instant, I found out if you use Facebook, you're old. So that's cool. I guess I need to get on Snap or something. I just don't understand.
A lot of the airmen, like it's old until people start complaining, and then that's the space. Or yeah, it's empty. But yeah,
I guess I don't understand
because everything is old now. Like the position in itself, like as a senior enlisted leader, basically means old. So all of it. And so it's just it's super funny, just to interact and talk with people about stuff. But you feel it, like pushing on 16 years. It's starkly different from 16 years ago when you started this journey. It wasn't so much age that you felt it, but yeah, now it's just you're the person with 16 years worth of experience, whether good, bad, or indifferent. Like you're not the new, fresh, whatever. And then so a lot of times you get that, like, I don't understand. So
yeah, so I want to ask you one more question before we jump into the topic for the episode. And this is probably a loaded question. Maybe it's slightly unfair, but if you could fix one thing in the Air Force that would make the greatest impact, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, that one is loaded. I think. So this feels cool.
Is there something at 16 years ago that you felt we had that we no longer have, or other ways? Something different about 16 years ago that you wish was still here,
Um,
or things have only gotten better over the 16 years.
so we've gained things and we've lost things, right? Because that's that's the evolution of it all. I think a lot of, you know, I to to mostly for mostly good reasons, you know, the whole idea about shut up and color is no longer necessarily present, right? And you know, as a member of our Air Force today, you have several outlets to be able to speak to injustice, mistreatment, things like that, to where people are a lot more boisterous about certain things, and so you don't have to suffer in silence, um, which is a really good thing, and I think that that's a byproduct of progression. Um, but I think one of the things, and it's a difficult space because it's not what everybody wants, right? Like, so everybody joins the military for their own reasons, the same way that they did 16 years ago. And it's naive to think that like people join for patriotic reasons, right? Um, but I think the idea of team and like teamwork, um, we've lost some of that, and I think it's very it's disheartening sometimes because of just the kind of system that we created, right? Like, so certain things became very overtly competitive because of how we've structured it. And then so from that, people have kind of like, I'm in my own corner, I'm gonna take care of my own business, my own things. And then that goes to when I was, you know, talking to you earlier about this kind of deliberate development. Um, that wasn't the Air Force that I was introduced to 16 years ago. And so I can't remember a space or a place where there wasn't some type of deliberate, like I am here deliberately, whether that's on, you know, with the help of others or my own fruition. Like this wasn't an accident that I'm here. And so I think to that degree, right? Like, and maybe that was me naive 16 years ago or 10 years ago, even, of like, this happens for everybody. And the more and more I, you know, move around or progress in my career, I see more and more that it just doesn't. So
So, what year
I
did you
think
come in?
'07.
'07. So, what was going on in the world technology wise in '07? We had
I think we were just picking off cell phones,
pagers,
right? Like the smartphone. I think smartphones
right?
were just like becoming a true thing. So Android, and because it was
T9,
BlackBerry.
razors. Oh, Blackberries,
That was all like, you know what I mean?
PDAs.
Like, yeah, you had all of, and you think back, you're like, really, in '07? That seems like we would have had more things, but yeah, no, I
So we had
remember being in England.
AOL.
I don't know if we were still AOL in it, right? Like, because Gmail started to become a thing.
So the
Um,
internet was there, just not as prevalent yet.
well, we just didn't have it as, it wasn't as accessible on like personal devices. Because you can
Mm.
still, you know, like, I'm pretty sure, and now I really do feel old because I'm like, man, when I left, I had a, I had a, I remember having my like Nokia cell phone. I think by the end of it, I had like a razor rolling into uh, the military and whatnot.
Oh,
But I,
Snake. That's where it's at.
yeah, that was one of the best phone games ever. But I remember getting off the plane in England, taking that 2 hour drive to Lakenheath, um, getting there, and like the video they show you in tech school of like whatever your base is and base operations and stuff, and it looked just like that. And it was, I had
Mm.
dial up in England in '07, and everything was just on the cusp of change, I feel like. And then so, you know, we kind of got there, but um first base was overseas, right? And I think that's the other piece that when you talk about change, some of these environments where you're kind of forced to have camaraderie because it's just y'all. You don't have a whole bunch of people who are from the area, who have family in the area, who go home, who disconnect. And then, so I think that helped in those environments because you kind of needed a lot of work. Um,
Dang, that's a great
and so
point. So
sometimes I
I'm
think,
out here in Japan, right? And I was stationed in Guam as well, and I had troops that were miserable in Guam and did not have a good time. And I've seen it out here as well. Some people describe the ops tempo as super high, but now that you've been in multiple years, you're in a senior enlisted position, and your first base was overseas. Between those two people, the person of you now and the person back then, what are your top three or whatever number of ideas to get out and not feel miserable for these people that feel like they're stuck?
um, so you have to find your tribe, right? And I think that that's the idea now, probably more prevalent than before, is it's easier, right? Like it is, and whether your tribe is on the installation or in the world of the internet, right? Like the strangers of the internet. Um, and you have to find it. I think a lot of people who game, right? Like that's the construct. If you think about Air Force gaming and where it grew from was people just gaming, it caught on. Here's an idea, concept, and then so many things, funding and all, kind of took off from that. Where now we're using it as a recruiting tool. Um, but too often, I think you hear from people like, "Hey, they don't have, or we don't have, or there's not this on this installation." So when you start asking people like, "Hey, well, what do you like to do? What do you want to do?" Um, the manufactured fund, like that's not going to be cookie cutter for everybody. It's not what everybody wants to do, and especially if you're asking us to design it now. Like I know what I like, but those things may be starkly different because I just grew up in a different time, and you know what I mean. Like the focus, I think, is just different. But providing sometimes just like the inspiration. So I think that that's one of the things is um, not necessarily providing the activity, but platforms. And so as long as you have a platform mechanism for whatever it is you guys want to do, here's a platform for the space. Who's going to be your person to build it, and then it works. Um, not trying to direct everybody to the same thing. And so a lot of times, we talk about whole airman concept for folks and like, hey, you have to do these things. Uh, well, they took you have to do these things out of the Brown Book. And then even telling people about that, like it no longer speaks to these things. Just find your things. So we don't have it, build it. And then, that's also, you'll find you took the step that somebody else was waiting on somebody else to take. And then now you have your tribe. Uh, the other piece too is um, you hear from the older people too, like every assignment's going to be what you make it. But you got to be upfront about what it is that you want, right? Like I think there's nothing wrong with, hey, I came to base X because I have family that lives within 2 hours and I miss my family, and so that's primarily where your focus is going to be is reconnecting while you have that opportunity to do that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And so in the construct of building your team, especially as you roll through whatever level in the organization that you're in, how do we ensure, promote, provide platforms to be able to do that so that the team can perform at optimum levels. Like it's as long as we can explain the goals for people versus just trying to sit you with mandatory fund and all the terms and stuff that we came up with. Well, that we inherited because this stuff existed before we did. Um, of just taking the time and deliberately trying to get people some of that information. And so I think when you hear like, oh, it sucks here, because we were at Edwards, right in the middle of the freaking desert, and you got airmen in the dorms who have no cars and can't go or experience anything. So you start asking them like, "Hey, what do y'all want to do?" And you get crickets for a while, and it's just like, "Look, all of these things are possible." And then so some stuff turns over. If it's food, okay, great, people can bring it. If it's so, I think it's just starting to open the levels of possibility or what's possible for folks, and finding this is probably a key thing for leaders. I would say too, finding your change agents. So every whatever, right? Like as an airman, who was that airman who was connected with all of the airmen, and has no problem telling you when stuff is jacked up? You need to make sure that person is somebody you're talking to on a regular basis, and then leverage it, right? Like I remember there was several times that I'd go and I'd say, "Hey, what's going on? What are people thinking? You know, where does it suck?" To that person, and they would gather the information and bring it back. So it's not, you got to know who your connector, who your bridge is, in any situations. And I would say from top down, right? Like who's the leader that's going to listen, and you take that and use that. Sometimes holding us accountable for like, hey, you said that you would do X, Y, Z in these spaces and places, and so we got to stand on. I'm here for you, right? You hear that all the time. Like I work for you. I'm here for you. Service position, but like we just got to stand on it. So I think those are the things. Like you said three, and I'm probably elaborating on way too many. But in summation, I would say um, showing people what's possible, uh, holding them accountable to exploring what's possible, um, and giving them a voice. Probably be the three biggest things that I would say that would help. Because that's when I go back and I look at my experience in my first tour in England. Like,
Did you
I
enjoy
just needed
it?
to know, like, I just needed somebody to like the room. Yeah, like, like my wife will tell you, I was probably like 4 months in, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do my 20. It was so funny because for me, the opportunity, like I'm in a new country, uh, the job that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, like we work a lot, and that probably plays into just some of the
Were you Topa?
no. So I fun fact, I've never officially worked TOPA. I worked in outpatient records the second time I went to England for like 3 weeks. So when I got there delayed, and the person who got there before me went to outpatient records, and then I was working in family care and PHAs. So we had a PHA cell back in the day. That was two 4As and a 4N in the family care clinic. Uh, so I worked PHAs my first year in the Air Force, and
Nice.
I enjoyed the job. I worked in family care. The team was, the environment was great. And then I moved to readiness, and then I left Lake Duke after that. But it's it was team stuff, and it's like my mentor for life uh, at Lake and Heath, and changed the trajectory of my career absolutely. Right. I think you find those people and just appreciate and kind of like the little stuff. And I mean, to this day, so I don't know if you're tracked, so I'll name names because it works.
Did you see Vanessa made chief?
Say it again.
Did you see Vanessa made chief?
Yeah. So what's funny is I had never met her, um, and I met her at SLW, but I had spoken to her a couple of different times for a couple of different things actually, and it's so super funny to like, hey, we've spoken over the phone or via email for a lot of different things. In my congratulatory, good to meet you kind of speech. Um, but it's super cool, man. Like the people who, because we had 5 last year, we had 5 this year for 4As, and you get into spaces where like, man, I might not know, and at this level, like you should, and you feel kind of bad about it. But I was like, at least this year, I know a couple of these folks. Out of the 5, I think I knew 4. Like had either spoken to them, met them before, or had some type of correspondence.
There was like 24 N's. I was confused. I didn't realize 4N was
Well,
so much bigger than we are.
well, so we can talk through what's happening in the Air Force,
Okay.
right? Well, in the AFMS right now,
I thought we're
um,
reducing, right?
and that speaks. Well,
Hmm. I mean,
we're
they put it on
reducing. So
pause, but is it going away?
we're reducing. we're reducing who's on active duty. A lot of folks. So both last year and this year, right? Because we were at SLW last year. This year, same trend, man. So many people were like, yeah, either I hit the button or I'll hit the button in 23 to be out. And it kind of started in 21 with this mass exodus of just chiefs, seniors who are punching, man. Like
So our dental chief, she came over and was talking about the exodus. So I'm curious on what your thought is. She had said she believed with the transition to DHA, well, the turmoil, it makes it kind of difficult. And if you're on the fence, that's kind of the push one direction. The other thing she was saying, which I didn't initially think of, with DHA standing up, they're hiring a lot of high-end GS positions. So not only if you're on the fence and it's all this churn, it's difficult. Also, it has the positive aspect where you roll into a position where you're doing potentially something similar to what you're doing now, but in help standing up DHA. But what do you think?
yes, that is in both aspects. People are seeing that. So people are understanding that a lot of the things that we really need to move this forward are going to rely in stability, right? And so the stability in a lot of the DHA stuff that's standing up is going to be in civilian positions. And so even now, right, like there's a lot of folks that are, and I experienced this, working at an MTF because I've worked no staff jobs, no headquarters, no nothing. And I would tell you, it used to be super frustrating being overseas and calling, staying late, or well, no, it was staying late most of the times to call back stateside and not get anybody. Like at AFMISA, old school AFMOA, and these civilians, like, and this is like 11, 12, 13 telework. Like, because these folks ain't answering the phone, they ain't answering emails. And then so I think in that regard too, there's a lot of frustration in with this changeover, this process on how things go. There's a lot of positions that either need to be created, haven't been filled. And then so you're battling that, right? And it's easier to know that Chief such and such or senior such and such. So Chief Come, primary example, right? He retired, became the director of staff for SG, and brings a lot of his enlisted experience back to the position to make sure there's some consistency there. And he was a seaman. So it's a perfect, like, he stays around. And then so we're just starting to see that from folks to where people are really asking, like, well, what else is there for me to do? Because on this side, you gotta, under Air Force construct, usual like maturation would be you start as a chief either in your career field or in the off chance that you make it outside of your career field, you come back and you're a 9G or a squadron chief somewhere, depending on how stuff is set up. And so if you're in a 9G spot as a group, like, you start as a tier 2 in a small facility. You do your time frame in that. Maybe that was 12 months, maybe it was 8 back in the day. And then you roll to a tier 1 facility. After the tier 1, then either you roll into command chief list and you go the Air Force route, or you staff job, head of a program, curriculum manager, CMF. So you're in those lanes. But the year groups, and so this is the other part that I think is interesting too, is like anybody. So if you have chiefs that are high 3 and year groups maybe 23 to 27, so a good bit of our chiefs. But then we started to slide back where people were getting promoted earlier. And then so most of your chiefs that you have, most of them are retirement eligible. So what's keeping them around is, hey, I'm not with the moving every 12 months. So they moved it to 24 because they were trying to, make sure people stayed and had some type of stability in their retainability, because at this point, most people kids are high school or at least, middle to high school, and all of that bouncing around, it just don't work for them. So we have that, like, also playing into When people are like, I'm gonna retire, I'm gonna go work, it's gonna be beneficial for me from a professional standpoint, and it's gonna be good for my family. Those are the things that people are considering. And so anybody that's less than 20, now in these spaces and places, you don't have that same kind of leverage. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I do have a question on the spaces, but I want to jump back, which this is out of order, so hopefully I can figure out how to edit. I guess this is me learning. But I had a thought back to what you were talking about with being at the new base and getting into your tribe. I think there's two things that are really important out of that. And one of those is kind of going back to the joke where I said I'm old in relation to Facebook. So I think one of those is you had mentioned that change agent. I think that has to come from somebody that makes it cool. When we say anything, it's not cool, it falls into the mandatory fun as you and I know it, and that's not cool. And so it needs to come from the Snapchat of the time versus the Facebook of the time, I think. So that's one that's pretty important. And the other thing I wanted to touch on, which is super important to me, so I talked about perspective earlier. That's one of like a super guiding principle for me. But my other one that I think is super important, I don't know how I would rank them, but very similar would be balance. There has to be balance, I think, in everything in life. So I had troops in Guam that would kind of stay in their room and game. And I think that's awesome to stay connected to your family, your best friend, your brother, whoever it may be. That's great stuff. But I think there has to be balance in everything in life. The yin and yang, or whatever term you want to use. But I think there has to be a social, physical interaction. Because even when we played, making ourselves old again, I mean, when we played Nintendo 64, we were gaming, but we were, four to the couch, everyone with a controller, messing with each other, unplugging each other's controllers and things like that. You were physically there. So I think we were able to balance both of those, but now we're getting more towards, sitting in a dark room by yourself on the internet, which I mean, I think can work to a certain extent because you are staying connected. You're on the phone or on the audio portion of it, talking to them and things like that. But I still think you need to get out. And I don't know if that's me being more towards the extroverted side. And like you had said, I don't think one solution fits everybody, but I think there does have to be some form of balance on getting out and seeing people at the bowling alley or the bar or wherever it may be. And kind of to go back to our point where we were talking in the pregame was, people saying they hate people. I think, if you lock yourself away all the time, then when you do come out, you have difficulties, but that's because you didn't come out very often. But yeah, I think that's super important. I want to jump back to this question, so I'll move this around in the footage. So another loaded question, one that always drives me a little nuts, but knowing spaces and spaces, what are your thoughts on matrixed and out of hide positions? What do you think about the superintendent never, or correction, senior enlisted leader never being on the books?
So this one for me is this is probably a sore subject. It really because so when you think about it, right? Like so I was in a position there at Edwards, 4th Squadron, at one of the smallest groups in the AFMS, right? And then so you pull because we only have one 4AO senior NCO on our books. You pull that, but I'm only whatever you do, right? I'm going to pull this the well, no, for the entire group we only have one. So you pull that to the squadron, right? And then so at a lot of these places, you should be able to still do functional stuff, not a problem. But within a flight, now I leave that flight to a staff sergeant, and not how well am I setting that staff sergeant up to truly develop in the time frame that they need, um, and not so much of like, oh, they're ready, right? So I think when we do that, and we're saying that, hey, you as a master sergeant at one of the smallest MTFs in the AFMS have the title and responsibilities of a squadron SEO. And no matter how we shape it, put it, wrap it in a bow. Those are the same responsibilities that a chief of a squadron or a senior of a squadron have. It's the same responsibilities. You're talking about maybe difference in people, possibly, but master sergeants all across the FMS are doing it. Ran into a master sergeant at McDill doing the same thing, right? And to again, from a developmental standpoint, it worked out well. But I had counterparts that were seniors at Nellis, at Eglin, at Wright Pat, who were in flights as a senior with maybe 40, 60 people that they're not directly supervising either, right? Because when you think about like as an SEL, not really supervising anybody, but you got to review everybody's stuff. So I think that out of hide, where we look at how we set up our stuff, it doesn't have to be that way. And I think actually the conversations, because this is a conversation like 2-3 years at least that I've been involved in the making, from when I went to intermediate executive skills class, and that was one of the things they asked us about, and we were like, stop with the out of hide stuff. And then so if we look across the board to security forces or maintenance groups and all that stuff, their squadron is one AFSC, 2-3 at the most, right? Not a lot of AFSCs. And then so that billet is a chief billet, because you're talking about, you know, a maintenance squadron of a lot of freaking people. In a group, we group it all together. And so if you break out from the squadrons, just put so here at Hanscom, there's no chief. Only MTF. Well, I won't say only, but of the 75 or so MTFs that the Air Force has, it's the only one that doesn't have a chief at the top spot. And it's a squadron, so they're like, oh, it's a squadron, the senior can do it. Sure, right? But it's an MTF. And so if I have a senior who can, for the most part, run an MTF, one of the smallest ones, LA has a chief sitting in their spot, similar size. I think Columbus is a group, and they on the books, I think they may have 20 more people than we do. But it's a designated 9-level position on our books. So there's no discrepancy about who that should be, right? Like I'm not aligned under a flight on the books. It is aligned under the command section. It makes it easy.
So now that we've moved towards talent marketplace and we continue to use different systems and things like that, I apologize for my lack of knowledge, but in the future, can we start to project the same way where an MSC is inbound? We try to figure out where they fit into the RMO, TOPA, wherever they fit based on the current manning. Couldn't we look and project out the next year to figure out who is there, slide them into that slot, and then get the backfill? Because at our last base, there was 2 major negative events in flights, and both of those flights was where the SCL, or at the time superintendent, was supposed to be. And you gotta wonder, I mean, you can't, tie A directly to B. I don't think that would be impossible. But you got to wonder, you have 2 massively negative events, and it happens to be where the master sergeant / tech was missing from the flight. Would it have happened? Maybe it still happens. Maybe the Swift cheese lines up, but it seems pretty crazy that it happened 2 for 2. So I wonder, what do you think the solution is? I kind of talked about the problem, but how do we fix it?
So again, it makes it take the guesswork out of it, right? Because I think you also do squadron commanders of the service that way. So in the same manner, everybody else is hired, and this as I said, this is probably a sore spot for me, and one that I know at least there's a working group to try to solve it currently. But when you take everybody is hired, wing commander, group commander, squadron commander, they're all hired. Command chief, group chief, all hired. Squadron chief is not, or squadron SEL or whatever, right? Like you play the same list of, hey, here's an assignment, and then now you start guessing on who, when, where, what, how, and there is no like backfill, right? Like that squadron commander comes in and they have to select their person based on the availability of people in that area. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because you are just limited to whatever is there that needs to match up. So, like, one of the things that I was trying to work for this position, so the vectoring process for seniors, chiefs, play through the chiefs group, all of this stuff works out. Senior down, from senior to tech or whatever, we have a vectoring process that kind of looks at your record and says, hey, based on your experience, skill sets, certs, whatever, we are going to vector you towards these positions, spaces, and places. When I made senior, it wasn't a vector. This isn't a vector job. It was just they had to level seniors out. And then so I had a prioritization list. And then so I'm going to send, selects or seniors to different locations based on whatever. Trying to get an understanding about how I got here will help whoever comes after me, because I think one of the things that this goes back to my deliberate argument. I can't say that in this position I was here deliberately, and I don't know that, right? Could be, could not be. I don't want to make a inference either way because I just still don't know. But the fix really is aligning. So we have CMS sergeants across the Air Force. Not sure how many, and I'm not going to sit here and say they match up to the same amount of squadrons that we have. But if we think about from a developmental standpoint, where we go now as an AFMS, do I need a chief running a squadron? I would argue no, right? Because you're going to tell me this spot was a chief spot running a squadron, and you're saying a senior can run it. As a standalone MTF, no chief top cover, you're saying a senior can run a squadron because it's a squadron. And so across...
Is there any relation between number of people, or how do they get to the determination of, is it mission set plus dollar amount?
Maybe. Because that don't matter, right? Like, as a senior is going to get, like, I say a senior is going to get paid a senior. I mean, I haven't even put my stripe on yet. So
oh, no, I mean, like, budget for the clinic or something, like some type of numerical value from the clinic that maybe you normally wouldn't think of.
Well, so when you think about it from that perspective, though, like, your military manpower piece, it all still rolls up. Like, it's not coming out of your O&M. So, so it's
but you don't think the chiefs get the bigger / higher responsibility, like larger budget, larger pharmacy, larger?
That would make sense based off, like, personnel, probably, right? Because this is where I would say you could have a like prioritization, and I haven't seen the chief list of which tier 1 facility do we send the chief to. Your Right Patch, your Travises, your Keislers, like, it depends. But I think from that regard, you have to consider if our construct is going to remain squadron group and not MTF-esque as we roll in the DHA. So not looking at it from a facility perspective and outfitting facility versus, do I have this person as a squadron? Do I have this person as a group, kind of stuff? Then having a chief run a squadron, I don't know if we need, because we have so many seniors that are sitting in flights that I don't really, so like a flight superintendent or flight SEL, I don't really value wise, like, I have a senior at, let's say, Nellis, who we advertise to run a 40-man shop. But then I had a master sergeant who's the senior enlisted leader for 106 people. It's not equating around our Air Force when we talk about promotion and responsibility. So and then what if we really think about it? Like, if I'm a senior and I have a 40-person shop and I'm at this location where things are cool, I don't really have to do a lot. Yeah, I may never make chief. I don't really care if that's not in my wheelhouse in space, but there's no push to grow your level of responsibility outside of you just having intrinsic wanting to do more. There's not a push. So I'm saying that it's okay right now in the way that we have our construct for this master sergeant to who I may or may not have just promoted to master sergeant, by the way, based off of however assignments role. Like we had, like I think we take for granted. Like Russell was doing SEL work as a tech sergeant, and just took it for the granted for the fact that she did well in the role. But that's not what we're asking our tech sergeants to do. It just so happened that
So sweet.
she was who she was
Technical
and did
experts,
great in the
right?
role. But in those situations, right, like we took that capability away from the pharmacy, good, bad, or indifferent. But it's some of this is we hurt ourselves in those spaces and places where we don't do this deliberately. And so I think the answer really is so the Army uses the first sergeant position, the rank, to a position space. They've aligned it to positions. And then so I think as we evaluate our top 2.5%, all of our senior slots, is there an ability for us to align that, do that a little better? Absolutely. To where even on the books now, if we got a master sergeant that is in a flight, is it advantageous for you to roll that master sergeant into the fact for the squadron command team so that it is understood you are either being gained to this position or I would say even better, hired for the job. So we talk about talent marketplace, and this is at least on the 4A side, one of the things that I just want to have conversation growth about is when we do this vectoring process, and I'm saying that you're being vectored for a key leadership position, what does that really mean? Because I'm in a leadership position for an MTF, and I'm not sure we deliberately develop all of our master sergeants who either make senior or senior master sergeants to come do this job. Could people adapt and overcome and survive? Yeah, sure. But like for what this is, it's an environment and not trying to puff up what we do out here, but it's an environment that you don't know all of the things that we do up here unless you're up here. And so we haven't told this story well at all. But I would attribute that to a lot of our other platforms and spaces. I'm going to send you, hey, Master Sergeant, congratulations. I have an open Master Sergeant slot at Grand Forks. You are going to that slot. You get there. Squadron commander needs a senior enlisted leader for the squadron. You just put yours on. Hey, you're the highest person, highest ranked member in the squadron. Now you have squadron SEL stuff, and we have done nothing to prepare you for it. You just accept the role, and then now you're reviewing EPRs and working with the command team to make sure administrative actions are going well. Like I got mentor people now. Some personalities aren't like you gotta do some stuff to get there, right? Like what if I'm introverted and I'm one of those people that I'm near family now and I just want to come to work, go home. But you're the person. So we don't do that deliberate look of we're saying we wanted to revitalize the squadron as a Air Force. That's been like the thing, unless we've changed that. But we're not equipping the squadron in ways and spaces to be able to cover down and do that kind of stuff. And if you're promoting me to be a senior master sergeant with provisions, hopes to promote to a chief billet, right? Like I feel like we hurt ourselves in that regard. So if I have here in my construct, I have the same amount of master sergeant slots as Air Force. In a squadron construct. It's crazy. Okay, I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you before.
Oh, I lost you. I was just saying. I think that
Yeah,
goes
I
back
just
to
hear you.
balance. Trying to figure out how to balance the people that we need to push it outside their comfort zone, and that need to exceed. Because I think that'd be my concern with the talent marketplace. If you're just waiting for people to apply, the people that could potentially do really great things would never apply, and we'd miss out on that opportunity. But I mean, going back to your point of the deliberate development, maybe preparing people better, they would go and click the button because they would feel prepared as opposed to. But I think we do a lot of internal negative thoughts, unfortunately. My other thing, I'm not really sure on, but again, to play devil's advocate, I wonder on the other side of that, like one, why has it not happened to this point? And then two, the AFPC burden, if we're opening all these hired positions and whatnot, I'm curious what happens there. They have to go through a lot more records, and how much workload does that push out? And maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the workload on getting good people in there is worth it throughout the Air Force. But it would be something I think we'd have to look at to figure out how much extra, because when you do the bidding process and the hiring, it's going out to the commanders and it's going throughout the Air Force. So that's man hours throughout the whole thing. But if you get a good solid person for a year or two slot, I mean, I feel like the minutes of time would have to be a huge return on investment.
So what we kind of do right now is, and they're going to do another one, right? So we got a DT that's coming up for our career field. Most of the career fields are doing that for, especially your senior TOs and master teams, um, to identify key developmental position spaces where people can go, and then key leadership positions where people can go, and then the people who kind of fit within those constructs. So if as a master sergeant, because it's possible that as a master sergeant, I could have never, like, the things that you could have never done and be in positions to do certain things. So as a master sergeant, I could have never done a flight chief position. It's possible. And then now I move from an NCOIC, I make master sergeant, I roll to another space. I get there. I'm the only person that's in house at the time. And then so the squadron commander is like, hey, you're my SEO. So I can go from NCOIC to squadron SEO as a master sergeant. On paper, it looks great. If you kill it, it'll work out for you. You may see it, right? But not putting a seasoned, for the most part, senior master sergeant in some of these roles and responsibilities deliberately rushes some of our, like, growth, if you will. So you've now put me into an opportunity where I'm sinking and swimming, and I don't have all the lifelines, right? So I could say if I wasn't proactive in trying to learn, okay, what do I need to do as a SEL? That could have been harmful for not just me, not just the commander, but like the squadron. And so I think in a lot of times too, when we talk about people and the people to do these things, we have processes that are already in place where we're looking at records already. I'm already looking at your record to see what positions you can be in for. But in a career field, if I'm not trying to prioritize the leaders versus the folks that are functional, like as a senior master sergeant, you really don't need me to do anything functional on a day-to-day basis, right? I need to know how it all works, but you don't need me to make the Kool-Aid anymore. I just need to know a formula to make the Kool-Aid.
Do you think paper records accurately reflect people?
So yes and no, right? Because who's vetting that process throughout your entire career? Am I going to be able to go back and validate this, and this? I do think that it promotes a conversation that when we come back, because the outbrief from this DT is I put in all of my information, your SEL or command chief, depending on whatever level you're sitting at, group chief, and your commander have to sign off, say about whatever it is in your career, right? And then so there's several iterations where people are talking through where they've seen your performance and where it could go. And then so in talent marketplace, because that all happens in that realm, the system should evolve into where, based on my vector, you have that in the system, it's attached to my stuff. So over the course of this year, I should be focused in on spots. In the same time frame that you're hiring a squadron commander, the squadron SCL should be in that same timeline, right? So that command team should be on the same type of timeline rolling through. And they're starting to line it up for groups, because I'm seeing that where the new commander is coming in, and then that commander hires their group SCL, and they run through, because they've regulated how long. Chiefs used to be able to PCS every 12 months. Now it's every 24. And then so they're trying to work those cycles, because your team needs to be able to normalize, if you will, right?
So with the hiring process, we're talking a lot about the system and the internet.
You still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
All right, maybe.
Lost ya? Mic check, mic check. Mommy. Lost ya? Robert. Dun 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 dun. I'm still there. Oh, you're back? Maybe?
Oh, okay. Sorry. I don't know if you hear me or not. But
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
and then, so with that in mind, I think the biggest piece now is the setup, the
So,
structure, how we're
are we
dealing
going to
with
do
different
like
like that. And so
interviews
instead of,
or something?
as a brand new SEO, as a brand new senior SEO, possibly putting you in spaces and relying on our assignment system to get it right, the deliberate development piece is moving things around to where it makes sense. Our assignment system, our process, what we use, how we vet things, the rules, all of that stuff, it's all still from whatever we were doing 20 years ago. And our construct, what we have, isn't the same. I mean, some stuff has incrementally changed, but when we look at it, like, we've recently just moved from AMS, we still kind of apply those same concepts and rules. Like, you got to apply for a job versus you were vectored in these spaces. And so we advertise jobs 2-3 times, even at the tech master sergeant, senior master sergeant level, because we're waiting on people to apply for things that, like, you need to understand with the rank, with your experience. These are the spaces and places that are potentially where you go. And so we're relying on this volunteering piece in this versus deliberately saying, hey, because you have done this work, these things, when I give you this vector and say that you are either vectored towards, resource management or readiness, these are all of in the next 12 months, these are all the positions that are going to be available based on, or at least all of the positions that you can fit into, based on what we have in our inventory and positions we've kind of vectored for. These are all potentially, spots and places where you can fill if you're PCS eligible, so that people know ahead of time frame, and we're not like doing this kind of haphazardly or just kind of by default. So if I knew that this job was going to be a possibility, the prep work that goes into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it isn't happening in that way. And then so you see where we have this mass exodus of folks, and then with the foreigns not having, I think last year they were at 6, 7, so something comparable for Chiefs. And then so this year they needed 20. The plan of action on, I need 4 0 000s versus I need 9 G1s from a duty standpoint. It's just different. And so
I wonder with the
we're getting
new airman leadership qualities,
these early stages as an NCO roadmap, if you will. How do you get there? And that's just on the AFMS side, right? Like, when you start talking about, you got to study previous chief master sergeants of the Air Force roadmaps to get kind of maybe an idea, and not to say that it's 100% succinct, right? Like, I'm not always going to pull the PACCAF or use SAFE command chief to do the job, but like stepping stones and spaces and places where this job should be able to lead to this job, should be able to lead to this job. If people want to be in those spaces, do you take the AFMC command chief to do the chief master sergeant of the Air Force job? Maybe, maybe not. You know, mission set, depending on where we are in the fight and how things go. But I think it's just some things can be a bit more deliberate when we just start talking about giving people, hey, you have aspirations to do this. This is the room that we light up for you to show, like, these are all of the opportunities and spaces for where you can potentially go, and not just looking at it from a 2-year standpoint. Obviously, people retire and all kinds of stuff. Like, can I plan my career down the road now, 2-4 years, to say not only this assignment, potentially the next assignment after that, what's available, and you start shutting off things or turning on things based on ad hoc. So we can add a bit more planning. The same that we're trying to do stuff for Africa.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, we kind of bounce all over the place, so let's see if we could knock out a little SLW real quick. I know we're over the time. If you're still good, we can press through, only because I don't want to get too far away from the event and kind of lose some of the things that you were thinking. So, Senior Leadership Workshop is every year. It's the first week in December. It's for all of the AFMS leaders, all the medical service members to come together and go through some briefings. It's 3 days. It's in Virginia. The briefs kind of change. Or usually a guest speaker. Lots of great snacks. It's a great time. But from your standpoint, Robert, what was the theme this year, and what was your big takeaway? Oh, you can't hear me. Now there's like a weird humming. Oh, you can't hear me now? Oh, technical difficulties. How fun. Can you hear me now? Nothing? Robert! I'm like, am I on mute? That'd be funny, though. Da-da! Well, you want to call it? Oh,